Douglas Murray, welcome to Honestly.
Great pleasure to be with you.
So, Douglas, we're sitting here and we are right on the cusp of the big 100-day mark of the second Trump presidency. And I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you to help us make sense of it. How's he doing? What grade would you give him?
Well, I'm slightly allergic to 100 days style things.
I know, is it a very American thing?
Well, no, it's like anniversaries. When we're doing this because it's the 243rd anniversary. But no, it is, of course, a milestone of a kind.
Well, they've certainly been treating it as one, meaning
Yes.
They want to get as much done in the 100 days. And there's been, I think, more executive orders than almost any president, perhaps, since FDR.
Yes, which is an interesting way of doing things and is something that you could see coming. Trump had said this was going to how he's going to do things. I think for me, the interesting thing is always a comparison with Trump 1. Trump 1 was, frankly, a mess. People were in positions who the president didn't seem to, know or rate, and then he had to give them the heave-ho and replace them with other people. And this time round, he's had 4 years to prepare for this. Obviously, he was preparing for it very seriously. He knew who he wanted to surround himself with. He knew he wanted loyalists, crucially, Trump loyalists, and that's what he's done. I'd have said that the fact that there has been so little pandemonium is just worth noting. Some people might think there has been, but really, I mean, it's nothing like it was. It's been pretty orderly. It's been concerted. There have been things that the president has done which seem to have amazed people, like tariffs, most obviously, which I cannot understand why people are amazed by. Because
all he did was talk about how he was going to do it.
Yes. I mean, every time I covered a rally, it's like tariffs were one of the big things he talked about. I don't know whether much of the commentariat class has simply got used to politicians saying they do something and then not doing it. And they're kind of shocked that he's actually doing the things he said he'd do. But he is. I mean, there's only been one major misstep, which was the signal leak, and that wasn't compared to some things that have happened in recent years. That story's now blown over. To my mind, domestically, he's done several of the biggest things he said he'd do. He has stopped almost entirely the illegal movement to the southern border, which is one of the things he was voted in on doing. He has been deporting illegal foreign criminals. That's one of the things he said he'd do. Tariffs, of course. Then on the broader foreign affairs beat, which is what I'm sort of in some ways most interested in at the moment, it's a mixed bag. Mm-hmm. His appointment of Steve Witkoff as the envoy to end all wars is it's an audacious appointment to give any man, I think. I mean, I don't think there's a man or a woman in the universe who could deal with this number of briefs that Witkoff is having to deal with. But what I find interesting and sometimes concerning is the extent to which already Trump's promises on some of the foreign affairs stuff have clearly not been able to be implemented in the way that he promised that they would. Some people will say, well, I mean, it was obviously just campaign rhetoric to say, I'm going to stop X war on day one.
Like the Russia-Ukraine war.
Nevertheless, he did say it. And, 100 days in, the war is still grinding on there. There are still hostages in Gaza, including an American-born hostage. The war is still going on there. The nuclear talks with Iran look like seeping into JCPOA point 2.
Obama's nuclear deal.
The Obama nuclear deal. And so on that, it's on the domestic stuff, I'd say a high score. On the foreign affairs stuff, it's a little early to tell, but it's concerning.
Give us a little bit more of a sense. Let's just stay on the foreign affairs subject for a second. We have run a lot of pieces in the Free Press explaining the sort of, and I'll be crude about it, the two broad camps that are inside the Trump administration on that issue. On certain issues, certain domestic issues, I think the administration speaks with a pretty united voice. But when it comes to foreign policy and the question of muscular foreign policy or pulling back from the world, there's, let's say, a cacophonous debate. And I would say
Yes.
on one side, there's Mike Waltz, former Green Beret. He's the one who is, I would say, of anyone in the administration speaking up most strongly for a kind of stronger hand. And then you have others in the administration. And this was one of the things you saw in that signal leak that was fascinating. You have J.D. Vance and others sort of caucusing with they've rebranded themselves as restrainers. Who's winning in that fight between the restrainers and, I guess, let's say, the hawks?
It's a little early to say, and it seems to go back and forth. We should concede, of course, that this is not only a live debate, but of course it's a very serious one. It's one of the most serious divides going on within the Trump administration, which is, I would say, not just between the hawks and the sort of isolationists, but that's one way to think of it. I mean, it's also between those people in the administration, most obviously J.D. Vance, who really do think that America should withdraw from most of the world and focus its efforts on the only real economic competitor to this country, which is China. And then there are others who say, well, they address that fundamental, what I've said before is a fundamental problem at the heart of the MAGA isolationist wing, which is they simultaneously want America to be the world's dominant power, but they don't want to be involved in the world. This is a very serious problem that at some point they will either address or fail to address. In that signal chat, we saw the vice president saying, he didn't see why America had to keep open the world's water lanes for, the Europeans or whatever. And there's a perfectly good argument to say, and I've made it for many years now, that the Europeans should step up on defense spending. But at the same time, if America and her allies don't keep open the world's waterways, the Chinese Communist Party would love to have the job, and our friends in Taiwan would be one of the first to suffer from the order that would have been ushered in. I think one other thing, sorry, it was worth touching on that, which is I think there is alarm from some people, particularly American allies. I picked this up recently on visits abroad. I think there is some alarm about the simultaneous softly, shall we say, in regard to Putin in particular, tolerance of the Kremlin actually not following what the American president has said they should do, like saying they won't attack energy facilities and then promptly attacking them. I think there's concern among America's allies, and again, I mean, the isolationist types can either think this is important or not, and maybe they don't think it's important. But that, at the same time as the beating up on the softness on the Kremlin and the Ayatollahs and Qatar, at the same time as what some of us see as a needless antagonizing of old allies, like obviously most clearly Canada and then Denmark. And I think the Danes are slightly bemused by the fact that what seemed at first almost to be a sort of troll has become apparent policy.
And in the case of Canada, and they're going to the voting booths right now, an election that seemed like it was a sure bet for Poilievre, the conservative, now swinging wildly in Mark Carney's direction, and he's probably going to run away with the results.
Yes, and I mean, seeing Trump say, I don't care, I don't care if Carney wins. I think the lefties are sort of easier to deal with. That has caused some ruptures and ructions elsewhere. So on some of that, and then on that, one of the interesting questions is simply, who is in charge of that policy? Because much of what is happening in Russia, Ukraine, and indeed the Middle East ought to be the brief of Marco Rubio. And he's conspicuously not leading these things. If I was Marco Rubio, I'd be absolutely furious that
that Steve Witkoff
yeah.
has more authority than he seems to have.
Yes, and the real problem on those things, by the way, and you don't have to be some kind of hawk to think this, is that the real problem on those things is that Trump clearly, his decision to appoint his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, to a, let's say, similar role in the post-2016 period, absolutely paid off. I mean, it really worked. And all the people who said, oh my gosh, I can't believe he's just got this son-in-law, this is, what does he know?
The ultimate Nepo baby position.
Right. And
he actually pulled off the Abraham Accords.
He pulled off the Abraham Accords. It was amazing. And all credit to him and his father-in-law for that. But this decision to bring, as it were, another New York real estate guy in as a result, because it did work last time. But this time, it's a little early. I said this in the post the other day. It's disturbing to see somebody learn on the job when the job is this serious. And when Witkoff said recently that he had found that Hamas were not entirely honest interlocutors in the negotiations, some of us did have a rather overwhelming feeling of, it took you how long to work that out? You didn't go in knowing that. Settlement of the Russia-Ukraine war. Think about what it is to have a negotiator who, whatever his other virtues, does not know any of the history of this conflict, going into negotiations with Vladimir Putin, who has his own entirely different view of history, going back, of course, a couple of millennia. That's a problem. It's a problem doing nuclear negotiations if you're just starting off from here, dealing with Tehran, because they will be very, very pleased to be dealing with somebody who does not have their memory.
Let me ask one question on Iran, and then I want to talk about Joe Rogan, and then, of course, your book. On Iran, of course, Trump, in his first administration, scuttled the JCPOA, Obama's nuclear deal. He called it a horrible deal. Marco Rubio said something similar. Now, under the leadership of Steve Witkoff, we ran a piece by Mike Duran the other day talking about how Steve Witkoff is driving the Trump administration on the road to Obama land and how strange that result is. We have a president who loves a good deal, loves deals, hates war, really, really hates war. How are you going to be judging whether or not, first of all, do you think a deal is even possible? Maybe let's start there. And second of all, if a deal is possible, how should those of us watching this with a lot of concern judge whether or not it is indeed a good deal?
I'm actually not very positive about a deal. I think it's highly unlikely that America can get the Ayatollahs to restrain themselves from enrichment. It's their goal. It's been their goal for decades. Now there is talk once again, as in the Obama years, about whether or not the Iranians could have nuclear energy for civilian energy purposes. And I mean, this is excruciating for some of us because we watched this happen before. Whenever the Iranians go that way, then you start to catch them out. Whoopsie, it turned out that our civilian nuclear program, our energy nuclear program, we're just looking into seeing whether or not we can put it on the top of a missile, to sort of exaggerate things. But that's how they act, how they behave. There was something before, just shortly before he died, the late scholar of the Muslim world, Bernard Lewis, at the age of 100 or so, was asked by a friend of mine, what one thing do you wish that the West would know about the Islamic world that it doesn't? And he gave such a brilliant answer. He said, I wish they understood that we in the West think in at longest 4-year cycles. I mean, really, we think in America about 2-year electoral cycles.
Or 100 days, as I began this conversation.
100 days. And he said, I wish people realize that in the Muslim world, a decade is the smallest piece of time that people talk in. So for the mullahs, Wickoff comes, goes, Obama comes, Trump goes, and so on. But the aim remains the same. I think, to my mind, that the great challenge for Donald Trump is, I believe he is committed, as he has said, that Iran will not, the Iranian Revolutionary Government will not become a nuclear power on his watch. For me, the question is, but what about after him? It is one thing to say that for the next 3.5 years, or three years, 9 months, whatever, they will not get a bomb. That's good news. That's a start. But the bigger thing is, after Trump, there could be another Obama. There could be another Biden. There could be an AOC. There could be anybody. Question for me is he able to make sure they never have the bomb? And that will be one of the things that his legacy will be based on. Not just if it happened on his watch. I think he will not allow that. But will it happen on any future president's watch because of things that happened during his time in office? That's one of the things I'm watching out for.
So there's lots of ways to judge the first 100 days of this administration. We can look at tariffs, we can look at the economy, we can look at immigration, Trump's war against elite universities, foreign policy, which I'm sure you celebrate,
wars, by the way.
and on and on and on. But I think there's another more harder to pin down way to think about the past 100 days, and that is culturally how things have shifted. And some people have talked about this as the vibe shift. There's lots of ways to describe it. Broadly speaking, I think we both know people who were not Republicans, but were so disgusted with the excesses of the illiberal left, were so disgusted with the shutdown of free thinking, the censoriousness around COVID origins, lockdown, the Hunter Biden laptop. We could go on and on and on and on, Biden's mental acuity, that they thought, you know what, even if I'm not voting for him, I'm happy this guy won. Or I'm going to hold my nose and vote for him because they need a corrective. Here we are 100 days later. And one of the fastest shifts that I've ever seen culturally is the shift from focusing on the excesses of the woke left, which, let's be honest, that's how the free press got its start, to now this rising illiberalism coming out of the right, what some people have called the woke right. But I'll just give a simple definition of it, which is for the past decade or so, we have seen an illiberal left that defaces the statues of Churchill and calls him a racist and all kinds of other things. Now we have a group on the right, and they are increasing in prominence, that is defacing Churchill's memory and suggesting that he and not Adolf Hitler is the true villain of World War II. I would love, Douglas, and this is, I think, a way to start to talk about your incredible interview with Joe Rogan and Dave Smith. But before we get there, I would love just your riff on the so-called woke right. How worried should we be about the illiberalism that's taking root, not necessarily in Washington yet, but certainly in major precincts of the online space? If politics is downstream of culture, how worried should we be about a movement that's increasingly popular that is revisionist in its view of our history and of our heroes?
Well, it's a little early to say. I mean, I can see absolutely how they could get more influence, and it could be more dangerous and more unpleasant. At the same time, I can see how one could overstate it. I mean, the president doesn't share the views of some of the people who are rampaging around online about history or the present. So it's a difficult time to predict it. If it isn't headed off and countered and argued against, then I can certainly see how it would grow. What I think is happening, by the way, maybe this is a useful way into it, is what I think is happening is that when people are part of a movement that is reactionary, they have a problem at the moment of victory, which is, what do you do now? You won. I mean, your guy is in office. I think that people give away a lot about what they really mean to do when they do what they do at the point of victory. What did you want your victory for? Was it to own the libs, or, as you said in the recent piece, cry harder libs isn't a policy? That was something you could treat yourself to maybe in the Biden years, but not now. This is too serious. what some people do when they have a rather unformed philosophy, which is me being probably very snooty, of course, in saying that, but I think
you can't help your accent, Douglas.
but I just think that if somebody has a rather unformed philosophy, one of the things you do, and I mean, people do this when they're very young, I think we probably all did this, is that you look around for the stuff that was left behind to see if some of it was stuff you shouldn't have left behind. The left has done that for years, and parts of it have continued to celebrate, Che Guevara. Some of them, you see young leftists looking to see if they can do Maoism again or whatever. And the cleverer ones realize, no, 70 million people died and that's bad. And, so let's not try that again. And some of the less intelligent ones will fall into it. And some of the ones who actually are malevolent and want to do bad things will do this exercise. I think the part of the right that's been victorious is weirdly treating itself to a version of this game. Not only have we won, but maybe we can look back and see why we lost for so long. And on the right, that version is, I suppose you get it in little bits of the Catholic right, still online and off, of sort of a Francoism admiration. You can sort of play it that way, and they do. But others are clearly trying again, and this is a very interesting explanation for this, because they're basically trying a Buchananite, Paulite right interpretation of the last century.
Buchanan being Pat Buchanan, the isolationist.
And there's a reason for that, which is that for all sorts of reasons we can both go into and know very well. Post-Iraq, post-Afghanistan, essentially the Republican Party lost an entire generation or two of foreign policy experts because they had been shown to be wrong, or wrong in part, or significantly wrong, or wildly wrong, evilly wrong, however you want to portray it. But by the time of the Trump era in 2015-16, nobody wanted to hear again from the old guard. Now, what that means is you have this huge gap in young people coming up because they don't want to hear from Dick Cheney. I mean, to put it at its most, they really don't want Dick Cheney to come out and tell them where they might be going wrong. And they wouldn't have wanted to have heard from Donald Rumsfeld when he was still alive, or from, any number of other people we could name. But that means that there's this vast land that needs to be grabbed, that people are wanting to grab. And one of the things they seem to be wanting to grab is, you see, go back earlier than that, go back before that. Why did we get involved in World War II? We, America. We got involved in World War II, and we shouldn't have done all this blood and treasure, and maybe we could have just allowed the Nazis and the Soviets to fight it out. The fascists and the communists could have fought it out. That's a sort of interesting, that's an interesting essay to ask a 17-year-old history student to do. But it's not serious politics. And it's certainly not a basis for a policy. Go back a bit earlier, and you get the people who are now the reason why you've got this weird online right-wing anti-Churchillism. I wrote about left-wing anti-Churchillism because the left always wants to attack Churchill because they want to destroy the heroes. They want to take out and deracinate the public square. Take out Jefferson, take out Lincoln, take out Churchill.
The right has its own motivations.
Now the right has an iteration of this, and the right's iteration of it now, I don't want to say all the right, we're talking about like inflection point people, really. Their aim is to say that it was Churchill who got America into the war, and Churchill who indeed got the world into the war. And this is, of course, ahistorical nonsense, but it's a very dangerous thing to play around with. And the way I see it is, and I've learned a bit more about this in recent months, but because I sort of didn't take it that seriously for a bit. But I think what they're trying to do is effectively a form of David Irvingism, which is David Irving, who was a once renowned historian of World War II in Hitler's Germany, who became more and more kooky as the years went on, or at least perhaps he revealed himself as the years went on. And he and others used to play this very dark game in the late 20th century, before it was effectively stopped in a courtroom when he was shown to be a Hitler apologist, was that they wanted to downplay the numbers of Jews killed in the Holocaust, up the number of people killed in, for instance, of the bombing of Dresden, find moral parity between the two, literally numbers parity, and then make the final move, which was actually the Nazis were better than the Allies. I think it's a version of that is starting to go around at the moment. At the same time, one cannot overestimate it, because this isn't something the president believes or is involved in. Marco Rubio doesn't, and so at the same time, I think we should not underestimate it, because it has a potential, among other things, to completely pollute the side that it's on.
Well, you take it seriously enough that in your recent appearance on Joe Rogan alongside comedian and libertarian Dave Smith, I'm certain that anyone watching this by now has seen that interview, but for those who haven't, go look it up after the show. You feel strongly enough about this that straight out the gate in this interview, where you were ostensibly there to promote your new book, you went right for it and criticized Rogan and Dave Smith for having kind of uncritical conversations, let's say, even praiseworthy conversations with amateur historians and others who are playing around in the way that you described David Irving playing around.
Yes.
Why were you willing to die on this hill? And let me explain what I mean by that. Joe Rogan has a bigger audience than probably all of CNN in a month. I mean, there's just no comparison. He is the King Kong of the podcasting space. There's a reason that everyone wants to go on that show, especially people promoting their books or promoting their work. And there's every incentive to keep him happy. So you'll continue to get invited on. You get invited on that show and you go right for it in challenging him and challenging Dave Smith. Why did you decide to do that?
Well, I couldn't not. I mean, I just have a basic policy in my life, which is that if I, and I sometimes give this advice to students when I speak at universities. It's like, you just don't do things that make you feel worse about yourself. If there's something that's going to demoralize you, that you're going to feel terrible about afterwards, feel lesser about yourself, just try not to do it. I literally have it in this sort of, could I look myself in the mirror tomorrow if I didn't do this? And the answer is no. And so I do it. I don't know if it's a hill to die on. The number of hills that I've been on in my life and the number of dying I've done. And so I don't know. I genuinely, I don't have anything against Joe. I was surprised that after a year and a half in Israel, 2 years of Ukraine, on 3 years, there had been so few people on who had in any ways mainstream views really about either conflict. I was surprised that he hadn't had anyone on who really, or almost no one on, who'd explained the Ukrainian case for self-defense against Putin. And I'm more alarmed in the last year and a half even to find that he had so few people on who'd explained the justification for Israel's war in Gaza, whilst going to people who I'm afraid, to tread back into the cesspool I managed to find myself in the weeks after that interview, I'm afraid is people who don't know what they're talking about. And I feel there's a very there's a lot that I feel like I trod into on that, but nevertheless, I just felt I had to. I don't like that. I don't like the platforming of endless, weird, kooky voices from semi-self-taught people. So here's the problem as I see it.
But is the problem with being self-taught, or is
No, it's not. I mean, as I stressed repeatedly in the interview, anyone can say anything they want within the confines of the law. Anyone can have a view on anything. I'm for that. I spent much of my career advocating for that. But that it doesn't mean just because some experts have let themselves down or let all of us down, it doesn't mean that you should simply lift the sluices of your society and allow all the sewage to just flow through it. And that's what I see happening. And you see, the problem here is Joe is a very skilled podcaster. People don't realize how good he is until you see somebody who can't do what he does. But if he if he wants somebody to discuss MMA fighting, you will notice that he does not invite comedian Dave Smith, because comedian Dave Smith has never been in a fight or to a fight, or maybe he has, but I don't think he'd know how to talk about the jiu-jitsu. Maybe he would. Maybe it surprised me. But Joe would not have him on to talk about something that Joe knows about. So why does he have him on to talk about a conflict that the guy knows so little about? Somebody recently upped on X a snippet of an interview that Joe did a while ago with one of these pseudo-historians, where he says, nobody has a right to say that you're a neo-Nazi or Hitler apologist unless they've imbibed your work and listened to all of it. And, it's like talking to somebody who thinks they know about a country who's never been there. And I think, yeah, that was one of the points I was trying to make. I mean, I was pretty alarmed by I don't really follow fires I've started in general, but I was pretty alarmed by
the reaction.
I was pretty alarmed by the number of people who found it, including Joe and Dave, found it to be some kind of really weird, snooty, elitist thing to say, if you're going to write about a place, you should have been there or know about it. You should do some of the legwork. I was pretty alarmed about that simply because in old media, and I certainly, that was a standard. Like, good God, the old media, legacy media, let us all down in ways that you and I could riff about for a fortnight. But there are standards. One of them, for instance, is that you cannot file columns about Gaza if you've never left Berkeley or San Diego or wherever. And just to play it another way around, I mean, if what I was saying was just such basic journalistic hygiene, which is, yes, if you're going to talk endlessly about a conflict, you ought to do what I do and at least put in the legwork. And it's kind of, in a way, it's insulting to all the many journalists who put themselves under dangerous and difficult positions to say, that's just, you don't need to do that. There's no, I can tell as much by sitting in Austin reading Google. And just to put it another way around, if there was a guy in China who was on Chinese state media, what other type is there, and endlessly wrote about the United States of America, didn't speak English, and had never been to the USA, but who endlessly told the audiences in China that America in the 21st century is no different from America in the 19th century. In fact, the KKK roams the streets of New York freely and persecutes our black brothers and sisters, and that segregation is still going on, and all sorts of other stuff like that. If we got wind of this guy, and we found out this is a guy in China who's never been to America, and he's telling the Chinese people about America, and it's so wrong, we would laugh at that. We would think it ridiculous that such a person had platforms. So why, I ask, should it be the case that endlessly, if you want to hear about the reality of Israel and Gaza, get the comedian guy on who's never been to the region, as he admitted on that podcast? In fact, not being to the region seemed to be some kind of badge of honor. It meant that he wasn't tainted by some of the perspectives he might have got. On the other hand, you'd have noticed that Israel isn't a white supremacist society governing a concentration camp in Gaza.
I think one of the dynamics at play here, and this goes beyond the conversation that you had with Smith on Rogan, I think it's just a bigger dynamic playing out right now, is over the past decade, probably longer, the left was in the business of making everything taboo. Even biological reality became taboo.
Exactly. And this is a backlash.
And the reaction the cultural right is having, the right, like broadly defined here, and I think it's breaking apart in all kinds of interesting ways, is no. You guys said everything taboo. We're making nothing taboo. And so the second someone comes around, as you tried to do in that conversation, and say, actually, you know what? the stigmatization of Holocaust denial, that's a good stigma. That's something we should keep around. The standard of going to a place that you write about, that's something we should keep around. What the listener, I think, can hear in that situation is, this is a person calling for cancel culture. This is a person calling for gatekeeping. And I find that dynamic extremely frustrating.
It's very frustrating.
How do you get out of that trap?
One, I just, you got to exercise hygiene on your own side. And the fact that people have been kept out of the conversation who should have been in the conversation does not mean that absolutely everybody should be given the platform to spread untrue things. And it's going to be, I mean, like everything difficult in this life, it's going to take some dexterity, because all these fine corners that end up mattering, they do need careful thinking and careful treading. My fear on it is that I think that something, among other things, something quite dishonest has been going on, which is that Joe and Dave were covering for a couple of people in particular who are mates of theirs, who they deny are bad actors. And yet the more I look into them, the more appalling the bad actorness is. Just this morning, somebody sent something to me of one of the mates of one of these historians who's anti-Churchill and so on. And this is one of his mates and somebody he cites. And this, I won't give the publicity to the person by naming him. This guy in this video I watched this morning goes to the Holocaust Memorial in DC and just does a video about what horse shit it all is.
The Holocaust.
And it all seems to me to be kind of, lame and gay and fake. And we're all being told to believe this just to guilt us and, not falling for it anymore. You don't want to be in the orbit of somebody like that. You don't want to be encouraging that. You can easily as a right, and somebody who's been a small C conservative all my life. I mean, I had probably a lapse at university of a period where for about 5 hours I was on the left. but I've been broadly on the right most of my life. And just as the left should be totally not tolerating Che Guevara-ism, Maoism, Stalinism, Leninism, don't let the right, when they're on the up, when they're working, when they're actually doing some of the things that restrain some of the obscenities and overreaches of the left, don't use that time to try Hitlerism again. For God's sake, don't be the thing that your enemies said you might be. This shouldn't be that difficult. And I intervened on that episode on Rogan because I just felt I had to. And I'm glad I did, but I'm sorry that some people have willfully or otherwise decided to completely misrepresent what I was saying. But as you know, Barry, one of the things about being in the public square is that not only do you have to forge your words for people to understand them clearly, you also have to forge them in such a way that a malevolent actor will not deliberately misrepresent them.
Not possible. Okay, I want to talk about your book. And I think the way maybe to set the scene here is we're living in a moment, Douglas, where we have a cultural right, let's not say the right, but an increasing group with increasing power on the cultural right that is, revising whether or not Churchill was a good or a bad guy, revising whether or not the Holocaust was as evil and as bad as we remember, while at the same time we have a very powerful movement and a chic movement on the left that is calling to globalize the Intifada. That, just at Yale a few nights ago, students in Hamas headbands were chanting, father, son, mother, daughter, we will honor all our martyrs, while harassing Jewish students. This was at Yale, not yet one of Trump's targets. Before we get to the book, I want you to just diagnose for me where we are. There's a understanding that anti-Semitism, rising anti-Semitism, the mainstreaming of anti-Semitism is a sign that a society is in very dire straits. Is that what you see here in America or in the West? And if not, what is the reason that these ideological movements seem to be gaining such power at the moment?
it's slightly like where we start off. I'm wary of it because I'm wary of over-diagnosing and of under-diagnosing.
Mm-hmm.
I never like the, I've spent the last year and a half covering the actual war in the Middle East. As you know, I mean, the book is really about three things. One is what happened on October the 7th and the testimonies I get from survivors and families and others. The second is that I wanted to see and chronicle Israel's military response and societal response up close. And the third thing really in the book is to ask why in this fight between what I call a democracy and a death cult, between the nation of Israel and the death cults of Hamas, Hezbollah, the Iranian Revolutionary Government, who literally worship death, love death, seek death for others and for themselves. Why would so many people find it so hard to know which side to be on? And I spent a lot of time thinking about that because it's haunted me ever since I saw the first bits of footage coming out of Israel of the Hamas terrorists killing people with such ecstasy, high, orgiastically violent. And, it would be equivalent to if in the 40s the Nazis had broadcast from Bergen-Belsen to the world, boasting. And then anyone in the world saying, no, didn't happen. Or, well, it may have happened, but there's some reasons and so on. These guys broadcast to the world what they were doing. So why did so much of the elite world, and some other bits as well, but why did so much of the elite world go onto the side of the death cult? I'm concerned about not getting this question wrong because, on the one hand, talking about Ivy League campuses is so damn rarefied. What do these places mean, really? They mean that our elite institutions have gone rotten. You and I could have told anyone that at any time in our adult lifetimes. But so I don't want to exaggerate it because a lot of just ordinary Americans on the streets don't want this shit.
No, but there's a recent.
Am I allowed to say shit?
Yes, you are.
Okay,
yes,
yeah.
But there's a recent poll of young Americans, and an astonishingly high number identify with Hamas. This is not a survey of Harvard undergrads. It's young Americans getting their information from TikTok and Hassan Piker on Twitch and who knows what else. So I do think that is real, and the kind of inoculation perhaps that was granted to a generation above us that, I guess the Shoah inadvertently provided, that inoculation is gone. It's gone.
I think it's not just that has gone. I think that there's something very important psychologically, which if I can say so, which I identify in the book, which is, in the book before this, The War in the West, I talked at some length about the anti-Americanism and anti-Westernism that existed in America in particular. And what I said there was that there was a very dangerous thing being set up in the United States and in other Western countries, which was that young people born in the 21st century were being told that they were guilty of things that they could not possibly, conceivably be said to have guilt for. You are guilty if you are born in America in the 21st century of slavery, genocide, ethnic cleansing, white supremacy, and so on. These are all charges you can take on their own, and they have more and less legitimacy wherever you want to look in the American past, as in any country's past. But to say to people, you are guilty, with no form of alleviation of the guilt, was, as I said in The War in the West, an extremely dangerous trap to put people into. I lent on Hannah Arendt's philosophy on this, about the not setting up a system of guilt with no possibility of forgiveness. And I said in The War in the West, I didn't know exactly how it was going to manifest. I could see it manifesting in the Western anti-Westernism and the American anti-Americanism. The one thing you can be sure of, as Alan Bloom said, in the 1980s, one thing you could be sure of was not just that a student at an American elite university would think that all truth was relative, but by the 2020s that all of the problems of the world were our fault. Now, as I see it, much of the reaction of the student groups and so on, first of all, it's all imported in one way or another.
Well, the ideas are Soviet.
There's that. There's also the fact that honor our martyrs. Come on. This is imported crap. This is Qatari-funded, Qatari-influenced, Iranian-influenced import ideology. This is not a generic ideology that happened to crop up at Yale.
But I want to push back on that because I do think that's a little bit of a cope. Like, we have a huge story in the Free Press today about the $29 billion from foreign governments, including Qatar and China, that have flowed into elite universities. And if you're looking to invest and pour fuel on a fire of anti-Americanism, you can do no better than the Ivy League. But let's not delude ourselves into thinking that—
I'm by no means pretending that that's the only cause. I'm saying that once something is pushed like this, once a kerosene like this is pushed by a foreign power into a highly receptive environment, something happens. And I'll just quickly explain what it is that's happened. What has happened in the last 18 months, and not just on the campuses, at Grand Union Station here in New York the other night, where protesters, pro-Hamas protesters, shut the station down again. What they're doing is what a psychologist would call projection. They are accusing the state of Israel of all of the things that they have been taught that they themselves are guilty of. They have been told that by dint of being in America in the 21st century, you are on stolen land. What do you do about it? Do any of the kids or their professors in question want to hand over the ground of UCLA to a tribe that has died out? And they don't. They could. They don't. But what can you do, I wonder? It turns out that you can accuse the one Jewish state in the world of all of the crimes that you have been told you are guilty of by dint of being born in the West. Why does this stuff work so well in specific countries? Works so well in America, so well in Australia, so well in Canada, so well in Britain, in the Anglosphere, effectively. Because all of these countries have been prepared for this in recent years. They have all been prepared, knowingly or otherwise, for just such a moment of scapegoatism. Just such a moment where you can say all of my sins, all of the things that I've been, like the Scientologists, with the particles they believe that you get from some
This is how they go. This is how you go clear.
This is how you go clear. This is how you decide your student days will be best spent hollering against the state of Israel, because you can accuse them of all the things you've been told you're guilty of. This is projection on a massive scale, but the evil that it reveals is extraordinary. I give an example in the book I give many examples, but one of the ones that really shattered me was that when the Nova Party, which as people will know was one of the targets that Hamas came upon that morning, October the 7th, 2023, when the Nova Party was memorialized, it was an exhibition you probably saw. I saw it in Tel Aviv when it started, but it was a memorial exhibition and a sort of recreation of what happened, testimony, and the exhibition traveled to Los Angeles and also here to New York, not far from where we're sitting at the moment. And when this exhibition opened, it was greeted by hundreds of protesters, some of whom on the way, you'll remember, covered their faces in kafirs and COVID masks because, as I can never resist saying, these people are simultaneously hot for intifada and fearful of the COVID-19 virus. Wildly worried about the Delta variant, I'm sure we can agree. But these cowards, the new KKK, they cover their faces just like this. They're cowards. These people are on the New York subway chanting, asking for any Zionists to identify themselves and get off the train. They get to the center of New York and they go to the Nova exhibition and they stand outside and they chant support for Hamas, support for Intifada, support for the murder of people at the Nova Party, claim that the Nova Party itself was guilty and a legitimate target. One of the men walking through the street of New York that day to the exhibition was a father who lost his daughters at the party. He had to walk in New York past a crowd of hundreds of people with a stage and megaphones celebrating the murder of his children. What level of evil do you have to have fallen into that you would think that you would stand outside a memorial to the young people killed at that party and say that the young people dancing in the early hours were guilty and deserved the slaughter and the rape and the murder and the beheading and the kidnapping? This is not a problem for Israel, and I've said this since October the 8th. This is not a problem for Israel. Israel has an army, and it has a civilian army, and it has the right to make its own decisions about how it protects itself. But this is a profound problem for America and the rest of the West, that we have people in our midst who glorify in the death cults, who find it easy to decide. Some people find it difficult to decide whether they're on the side of Israel or Hamas. I don't. I know which side I'm on. I know which side I want to thrive and to win. And I know which side I want to be over, in order that the Israelis can live in peace and the Palestinians can live in peace. Hamas is a disaster for Israel, but it's an even bigger disaster for the Palestinians. But that aside, why do so many people find it so easy to be on the side of the death cult of Hamas? And why do so many of them, not sure which side I'm on here, same people who said for years believe all women, they don't believe Israeli women when they're raped. They simultaneously deny that women were raped on the 7th of October and claim that the IDF, when they go into Gaza, can't help but rape women. Once again, projection. You claim that Israel is doing things your own side is doing.
What?
They accuse the Israelis of being baby killers.
I see everything you've...
They support the baby killers. They literally love the baby killers.
But how is it simply that people, that evil is real? And
Yes.
that evil, of course evil's real.
Yes.
But give us your best explanation of the unexplainable. How can it be that so many people who've been educated at the most storied institutions in American life are falling prey to this? And maybe put another way, and you write about this in the book, and as I read it, I'm like, wow, I can't believe I didn't think about it this way. You know, there's been so many protests since October 7th, 2023. And what you write about and point out is that there was no mass protest in this country against Hamas.
No.
Now, I'm an optimist. I believe that the vast majority of ordinary Americans understand which side is overwhelmingly on the side of good and which is on the side of evil in this conflict. But explain that to us. How have the most vocal, passionate people been on the side of evil, and where are the voices in this country and perhaps in the West more broadly on the side of the good?
Well, there are a lot of people on the side of the good, a lot of good people with a voice, and some without, many without. I have no instinctive sort of optimism or sort of Panglossianism, nor pessimism or depression about any of this. I simply look at the situation as it is. I would just say that there are a couple of historical examples I give in the book, which I'm really, really keen that people absorb, which are relatively little known. But the aim of them, from previous outbursts of anti-Israelism, anti-Semitism, anti-Jewishness, and so on, one of the things I'm very keen to point out in a couple of the stories and anecdotes I tell, historical comparisons I make, is to enliven people to recognize the idea that sometimes you can become precisely the thing you meant not to become. Sometimes in the name, everybody used to know this, sometimes in order to do the worst evil, you have to think you're doing the greatest good. Sometimes you'll find yourself thinking, for instance, I'm an anti-Nazi. I'm an anti-Nazi. I'm sure I'm an anti-Nazi. I've always been anti-Nazi. I don't like the people. And then you're on the side of Hamas because of reasons I give in the book. The truth is, as I say at one point in the book, that our age is very loath to use the theological language of evil. But it's become my certain belief in the last couple of years that we have to be able to use this term because some things deserve it. And the actions of Hamas absolutely deserve it. Not just their treatment of the Israelis on October the 7th and since, and their treatment of the kidnappees, but the treatment of people in their own society they claim to govern. If evil exists as a force in the world, as I believe it does, then it must be countered judiciously, carefully, always, as I believe I've seen with the IDF, always in the knowledge that what you are doing must be in defense of a society and not motivated by a hatred. But it must be comprehensively destroyed. And I have little truck with people who say that Hamas alone of all human ideologies is indestructible. Without needing to cite the Nazis, I would just say, look at the cult of the emperor in Japan up until 1945. We thought it could never be destroyed. It was far more powerful than Hamas. Far more powerful. And this country, America, which so many people on the left and now on the right want to disparage, they pretend that it did no good in the world. This country, America, among its many great achievements, saw off the death cult of the Japanese emperor by military defeat and by moral victory. And if America could do that, then it can do it again now.
Okay, I want to take some questions from people that have been sending them in, and thank you all so much. Please continue to send them in. Douglas, one of our readers asked this. Do you think that the new right's anti-Churchill, anti-endless war stance has anti-Semitism at its core?
Well, only in the same way that everything has anti-Semitism at its core. I mean, everything does. It's amazing. The Jews are like, there is the perfect scapegoat. I'm completely convinced by Girard's analysis of the scapegoat in human society.
This is René Girard.
Yeah. And it's violence and sacred. And I'm completely convinced by it. It's just a perennial human psychological need. Among other things, by the way, Jews end up being the perfect scapegoat because what happens with paranoids? With what happens with paranoia? You don't need to have met a Jew to start to get paranoid about Jews if you're going down a level of paranoia, because somebody's controlling things. I can't understand the world. Somebody must understand it, and there must be somebody running it. Otherwise, it's damn disorder everywhere, and like nobody's in control, and I can't cope with that thing. So I'll decide there are a group of people in control, and then in the end, it's quite easy to see it as being bankers, and then that would be the Rothschilds. Obviously, it wouldn't be Bank of America, and it wouldn't be the Bank of Scotland. It can't be the Bank of Scotland. It's got to be Rothschilds. Got to be. Only thing that makes sense. If I see a puppet master, because there must be a puppet master, because otherwise it's so darn complicated in this life. And like, if there's a puppet master, like, is it better if their surname ends with Witz or Stein, or is it better if it finishes with Smith? Like, the Steins and the Schmidts are sort of more available for the great, and there you are. Then you're off. And so, yes, I mean, look at the way in which the isolationists like Buchanan, they always end up with the thing that somehow, America was never lured into war by Armitage and Powell. It's the doc.
It's got to be Wolfowitz.
It's got to be Wolfowitz. It's got to be Dick Pearl, who was one member of an advisory board to the Pentagon for a time. It's never Obama. It's never Samantha Power? I don't think so. One of the things is this unfunny comic said to me on the Rogan thing was that the Wolfowitz, remember, it's always best to do it like that. The Wolfowitz doctrine had been trying to topple all these states, and it had been done. And I think the only one he was right on, I think, if I remember right, was Libya, which happened under President Obama's time. So like, they'll always find a Jew somewhere, not even connected to the administration of the time, who they can blame for this. And I'm sorry, but that is just so transparent. So transparent.
Okay. Someone else asks, I have my daughter's Ivy League university graduation in 3 weeks. Congratulations. Last year, they had pro-Hamas protests. How can I preempt this disruption? What should we parents shout back if they do show up? Douglas, any slogan they should shout?
It's so sad because I wish nobody had to do this. I wish nobody had to do this. These people are polluting the life of the university, polluting a graduation day. This should be a great moment of pride for the family and for the students. It should not be disrupted by these people. I would personally say to the administration that after my child has got heavily in debt for the great pleasure of being at this university, I would appreciate it very much if the ceremony was not overtaken by ideologues and maniacs of any stripe. So that's what I would ask first. And if I saw them on the day, depending on how much fire I had in my belly that day, I would, I'd have quite a lot of choice things to say to them. But I imagine many of them will be masked. Tell them to take their masks off. If they're so damn proud, if they're so damn proud of their work, I don't mask, you don't mask. We're proud of our work. We're proud of what we say. We stand by what we say. Unmask, you cowards.
Douglas, a lot of people ask a version of this question, which is, what can we do? A lot of people who read the Free Press and of course, read your brilliant Sunday column, Things Worth Remembering, identify with you, admire you, trust what you are saying and the way you're diagnosing the problem. And they think to themselves, and they're asking in the questions, I don't have a large platform, but I care so much about the kind of problems you're describing. And I'm alarmed, Douglas, as you are. What can we do, they ask, to stand up against the rise of anti-Semitism and anti-Americanism in our country?
Yeah. Well, the first thing is we should identify both of those things. We shouldn't be afraid to. You know, one of the things I'm surprised by about this dissonant bit on the right that we talked about earlier is that it is anti-American. Just as surely as the Chomskyite left was anti-American when it said that America could do no good in the world and never had done any good, so the isolationist-ish right is also being anti-American. They believe that America's never done any good in the world. I think that's flat out wrong. We should say it's anti-American, just as we should not be afraid to call out anti-Semitism where it exists and identify it as such. I'm sorry, you've done nothing about any other rights issue anywhere in the world, and suddenly the one Jewish state does something in self-defense. I'm sorry. Anti-Semite, of course. And that's not gatekeeping or shutting down. It's just a diagnosis. And if you're an anti-Semite, why not be proud of it? Why not say you are? Why not admit it? Admit that you have this dark thing in your heart. What can people do? The most important thing, I think, is that people should not give up on the fact that in a society like this, where everybody has a voice, I think everybody should use their voice. I don't think it's about the size of the platform, you know? It's about the one-to-one, face-to-face interaction, which has always been one of the guiding things in this country. Even the much oversighted de Tocqueville says that he's surprised by the face-to-face nature of American debate. I also think back to when I knew absolutely nothing about all this, when I was a student at Oxford. I haven't said this before, but I remember once getting into a late-night discussion with some contemporaries. The second Intifada was going on. I knew nothing about it. But I was horrified, as everybody was, by seeing the killing and the deaths on the pages. I think the Jenin massacre had just been claimed to have occurred, or maybe that was sometime later. And all the papers and the BBC and everything else in the UK was filled with anti-Israel stuff. And I suppose I was, as worried as anyone else. There seems to be killing going on, and I'm intelligent enough, I'm grown up enough to know killing is bad, but I'm not yet intelligent enough to know that that's not enough. And I remember a fellow student who was younger than me, who happened to be Jewish, who was very angry with the discussion as it was going, informing us of what was actually happening and what the Intifada meant and what it meant to people like him to see the buses blowing up and so on. And I wasn't yet dogmatic enough, but we talked about it, and he helped change my mind. And I think it's worth saying that because everybody has a voice, and you can use it judiciously and well and bravely. And That's the case whether you're a student arguing with other students or somebody with a big platform. It doesn't really matter. The size of the platform is not the point. The point is simply whether or not you use your voice well in the time you have. And to my mind, and I've said this to you before, Barry, that I do believe that the great thing about truth is that it punctures the darkness, that a glimmer of light is recognized as truth, that we do know truth when we see it. We can see it. We have the ability to discern it just as surely as we can see a ray of light in the dark. And it dispels the dark. And what's more, makes people feel less alone in the dark once you recognize it. I think everybody has this opportunity and they should use it. And it might be, it might be hopeless. It might feel hopeless at times, but people should never doubt the fact that just like that discussion I mentioned as a student, as an ignorant student many years ago, I think people shouldn't forget that almost nobody changes their mind like that. It's always a process. And what you do is you just put a fact into someone's head that they may not have considered. And then the rest is their responsibility,
It's such a beautiful place to end. I do want to ask you one more question, though, and that's about this book and really the way that you have spent the past year and a half, almost 2 years since October 7th. Despite what many people on the internet, I'm sure, are saying, you are not Jewish yourself. You're not a foreign correspondent with a particular newspaper. You write for a lot of places, including Happily Us. And yet I think you have done more to cover the war since October 7th. And I certainly know that you have done more to expose the irrational hatred of Jews and of the Jewish state and really of the West than anyone else that's alive right now. Talk to me a little bit as maybe a way to close about why you've prioritized this story. There's a lot of important stories going on in the world. And of course, you've covered those too. You've gone to Kiev and you've traveled all over Ukraine. And I know if there's some kind of dangerous hotspot, you will inevitably show up there in a flak jacket and a helmet. But this story has captured your time and your care and your thoughtfulness and your attention more than any other. And I think for a lot of people, even those who are broadly sympathetic to your worldview, for them, it will still feel like something happening thousands of miles away that might feel very far away to them. And I'd love for you to explain, in a busy world with only one person that has 24 hours in his day, why this story has so captured you, why you have been so tireless and passionate in exposing it and in telling it.
It's a lot of things. One is, as I've said to you before, I don't like lies. And I hate the lies told about Israel. And if you've covered any conflict there, you'll know that more than any other war zone, this is a war zone in which lies just go out everywhere, every day. People lie about the IDF. They lie about what the Israelis have suffered as well as what they do. So that gets me on an intellectual level. There's obviously emotional levels, some of which are probably too deep for me to go into, but one of them is, you see, is I do think that on one level, the supporters of the death cults, the people who would use their energies calling for the overthrow of all Western civilization, but who zoom in, and by that, that's not an exaggeration, of course, that's literally what the Columbia student protesters asked for, the overthrow, the destruction of all Western civilization. So I'm not on board with that because I love the civilization I'm from and I want it to continue. But they think that the first target they can actually take out is Israel. That's their view. They think they can take out a country of 9 million people faster and more easily than you can take out a country of 340 million people or so. And they're probably right in that regard. They're probably right. If you try to overthrow the United States of America, hard. Want to crush and completely destroy the United Kingdom? Not as hard. could be done. People have tried before, but didn't work. Want to crush a state that's not yet 80 and has only 9 million people in it, in a very dangerous region, surrounded by people who want to annihilate the people of the country. Well, these people see that as being achievable. Now, what is it other than that it's achievable? It was a fatal blow to all the rest of the West. The Western tradition, as you know, as your viewers know, is based on the legacy of the Bible and of Athens and Jerusalem. If you were to take Jerusalem out of the equation, you do absolutely cut off the tree of Western civilization, not on a branch, but at the root. The whole tree dies. I mention at one point in the book, as you know, the passage from Deuteronomy, choose life. And somebody said to me earlier today, but it's such an obvious edict. I said, no, it's not obvious. It wasn't obvious at the time of the prophets that people should choose life, any more than it was obvious at the time of the Ten Commandments that murder was bad. People murdering each other all over the place. But my point is that this target of the anti-Israel movement, the anti-Western movement, they believe Israel is the first thing they can get. I believe that in one way they are clever in their target selection. They are right. The Islamists believe that if they take out Jerusalem as the holy city of the Jewish faith, and indeed of the Christian faith, that they can win for their own religious cause. The anti-Semites around the world always seem to believe that if you get rid of the Jews, something magical happens in the world. I believe they've selected their target well in one way. They're correct to understand the significance of Jerusalem. I agree with them on the significance of Jerusalem. It's just that unlike them, I don't want Jerusalem to fall. And that comes to the second tiny bit of an answer to that question, which is this. In one way, as I said, they've chosen their target well. And in another way, they've chosen it so wrong. Because yes, they're right. They're right. If you attack the tradition of the Bible, you attack the Jewish people, you attack the Jewish state, you take out this root of Western civilization, and you contaminate everything, which is what always happens. Everyone knows anti-Semitism is a problem. For Jews, yes, but then every other horror comes out of the box. But here's the thing. The reason they've chosen it wrong is that in my belief, and having spent much of the last 18 months with the young men and women of the IDF, Israel isn't going anywhere. It's not going anywhere. The famous thing that Golda Meir said to Joe Biden, we have a secret weapon, and he thought that she was going to tell him that they had the atomic bomb. He said, what is the secret weapon? We have nowhere else to go. The great realization of Herzl and the visionaries of the 19th century, of Jabotinsky and the rest, the great realization that has been resolved is the Jewish people must defend the Jewish people with any friends they have, hopefully with many, but the Jewish people will defend the Jewish people in the Jewish homeland. And they will not give it up. And they, to quote the psalmist, I shall not die, I shall live. And in the face of the people who are calling for the murder and destruction of the Jewish people, my belief is they have chosen wrong, because the Jewish people and their friends will continue to say, I shall not die, but I shall live.
Douglas Murray, it's always such a pleasure to talk to you on microphone or over drinks, which hopefully we'll do later. Your book, of course, is on democracies and death cults. It is a New York Times bestseller. It is a Sunday Times bestseller. I'm sure it's 1,000 other bestsellers. I saw during Easter weekend, you were even beating like the Easter Bunny book on Amazon, which was huge.
The Easter Bunny books all died of natural causes that Sunday. So I didn't have to do a jihad hunt against Easter Bunny books in the end. But the next book will be called On Democracies, Death Cults, and Hippity-Hoppity Easter Bunny.
Perfect. So. For those of you who have not yet picked up this book, I cannot recommend it more highly. Douglas Murray, thank you so much.
It's my great pleasure.